Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are tuning into this webinar from. On behalf of the Center for Tourism Research at Wakayama University in Japan, welcome to the second webinar in the webinar series, Tourism, Sustainability and Recovery, Asia Pacific Expert Outlook. My name is Joseph Chia and I will be moderating the webinar tonight. I'm currently a professor at the Center for Tourism Research at Wakayama University. But because of COVID-19, I'm joining the webinar from my hometown, Melbourne in Australia. We welcome what is an international audience with participants from across Asia and Pacific and beyond. And we thank you for taking the time to join us. The Center for Tourism Research aims to be a key hub for tourism research in the Asia Pacific region. And tonight's webinar is part of that overall mission. We extend an open invitation to everyone watching this webinar to come and visit us in Wakayama. Just quickly, this webinar series is run on a monthly basis and will feature speakers at the leading edge of tourism research and practice. And while the focus will be on the Asia Pacific region, the overarching emphasis is on global tourism. We also acknowledge the support of our tourism industry partners, in particular, PATA, the Pacific Asia Travel Association, the UNWTO Regional Support Office for Asia and the Pacific, based in Japan, and the Kansai Tourism Bureau. So moving on to tonight's webinar, the title of tonight's webinar is Recovering Sustainably, Global Lessons for Japan's Tourism Industry. We are very fortunate to feature 4 speakers, all with considerable bodies of work examining broader ideas of sustainable tourism, as well as more nuanced insights into global tourism. If you have any questions for the speakers, please communicate these questions via the chat tool in Zoom. And at the end of the speaking section of the webinar, we will try our best to have speakers respond to some of the questions raised. Before we start, I'd like to make a very brief introduction of today's speakers before handing over to them respectively. Our first speaker will be Professor Graham Miller. Graham is the Pro Vice Chancellor and Executive Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, University of Surrey in the UK. Following Professor Miller, we will have Richelle Turner, who is the Head of Research and Insight at Moderator, based in the USA. Thirdly, we have Professor Javier Fonte, Professor of Sustainability Marketing at the University of Surrey also. And Javier is also co-editor-in-chief of one of the top-ranking journals in tourism, the Journal of Sustainable Tourism. And finally, we have Wakayama University's Professor Kumi Kato, Professor in the Faculty of Tourism and the Graduate School of Tourism, who will be also talking, giving us a Japan perspective on this. So without further ado, let's go to our first speaker. Our first speaker, as I mentioned earlier, is Professor Graham Miller. Graham holds a chair in sustainability in business and is Pro Vice Chancellor at the University of Surrey and Executive Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. Graham is chair of the University Strategic Sustainability Group, with responsibility for providing sustainability in all its forms across the university. He is also Distinguished University Professor at Wakayama University. Graham's research is interested in the drivers to create a more sustainable tourism. He was project lead for the European Commission project on the enterprise and industry's work to develop indicators of sustainability for tourism destinations across Europe. The results of this work has led to the creation of the European Tourism Indicator System, now employed by over 200 destinations across Europe. Graham is the former co-editor of the Journal of Sustainable Tourism. As I said, one of the leading journals dedicated to research around promoting sustainability in tourism. Graham has also been the judge for the World Travel and Tourism Council's Tourism for Tomorrow Awards. And Graham is also a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council for the Future of Travel and Tourism. So we're very privileged to have Professor Graham Miller speak with us tonight, and I'll hand over to Graham now.
Thank you, Joseph. Much appreciated. That was an embarrassingly long introduction and bio. It's always awful hearing your own bio come back to yourself. I'm very pleased to be associated with Wakayama University. It's been a long association now that I've had with them, and an even longer association with Japan. I first came to Japan when I was 20 years old and lived in the country for a number of years. So always very pleased to apply my thinking and to see what the implications of that are for Japan. We have a wonderful panel this evening who've got I was very pleased to be able to help to curate this panel. I know that they've got some fantastic data that they're going to present. So I'm going to start with a broader context of some ideas before we get into the more empirical evidence that Javier and Richelle and Kumi will present about what's actually happening. But I'm going to start with a few ideas just about this notion of we talk about this now being a time for change, and COVID has led us to this opportunity for change. And I just want to interrogate that idea a little bit and think about, well, why is this a moment of change? Why do we think that now is a moment of change? And indeed, actually, is there any substance to that, or is that just wishful thinking on our part? So I think in any process of social change, and there's a million models of social change that we can draw on, but we have to start with identifying a problem. We have to see that there is a problem there in order for it to be able to change. And last year at the University of Surrey, we had Johan Rockström, who is the chair of the Stockholm Resilience Center in Sweden. They've given birth to the idea of planetary boundaries, which I find is a very convincing, a very important way of thinking about the boundaries that we live within as a society. But Professor Rockström was talking about how if we're looking at social policy change, then that's a 25-year process from when we identify a problem through to when we see the beginnings of change. Now, I wrote my PhD, published my PhD on sustainable tourism, published that in the year 2000. So I'm coming up on 25 years of pushing at this. What it means, I think, is that as academics, we're almost doomed to be frustrated for almost all of our careers on pushing for change. We've identified change. We want to see change. We're trying to convince the rest of the world to change. But the role in the process we play is that we're at the very beginning of that process. And so I think we're almost doomed to be inevitably frustrated. And that perhaps does lead to a certain sense of cynicism that, well, is anything really going to change this time? We've seen this for 20 years, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years, and nothing's changed. So I think there is inevitably a cynicism as, well, is this really the moment when things are going to change? I think what we are seeing now, though, is people who are not academics, who just get on with their normal lives, just like to be left alone, seeing evidence of the effect of a change in life. A change in life has been imposed upon them. And so we're seeing the effects of that now on our own personal lives rather than professional lives. And those are for the good and the bad. And so we see environmental benefits, more nature. Certainly where I live, if I go out, I see nature more obvious. It's obvious that as humans have retreated, nature has stepped forward to fill some of that space. We're monitoring the impacts on air pollution, on carbon production. So we see some of those positive environmental impacts, and we come to appreciate those. There are clearly social benefits that we're experiencing: more time with our families, eating better, more time for exercise, less time in commuting, less congestion, some of those impacts. So we're experiencing these and living these, and therefore inevitably reflecting on these. We're also, though, seeing some of the negative impacts of this imposed change of life, and those are typically an economic impact. So we are seeing the loss of jobs, we're seeing an increase in stress, we're seeing financial pressures, we're seeing and feeling, I guess, the importance of jobs and employment and social interaction on our social identities and what it means to us to work in a certain position in a certain organizations. So we're having to experience what a smaller economy looks like. Now, I have Professor Tim Jackson at the University of Surrey, very esteemed professor, who talks about prosperity without growth, the idea that we can exist with a smaller economy and we can be prosperous as people and as societies. And there is, of course, a school of thought that says, well, look, we can grow again, but we can grow again in more sustainable ways. And the Green New Deal proposals that are being put forward in Canada and by the Democrats and in the US and by various countries across Europe talk to this idea that we can be bigger, but bigger in a different way. And so we can have a bigger economy. But we are experiencing the good and the bad, I think, of social change at the moment. And that I think is important, because destinations bring it to tourism. Destinations, and we use the same examples always of Amsterdam and Barcelona and Kyoto in Japan, who are calling for less tourism. Of course, they're not calling for the degree to which we've got less tourism at the moment, but now we're actually able to experience more of what less tourism looks like. And we can think about, well, now we understand what the impact of that will be on all aspects of society, not just on the environment and the social. So in any process of change, we need to see positive examples to follow. As I think we're seeing some of those positive examples now. We're seeing certainly values-based businesses coming more to the fore. There is, though, inevitably a path dependency to the way that we structure life. People who've invested in big infrastructure, airports, cruise ships, those have the potential to be stranded assets, and anybody who owns stranded assets will fight very hard to defend and to protect those. And so they will always weigh and fight against a desire to change. I know Richelle is going to talk about some of the changes in consumer attitudes and consumer values we will see, so I'm not really going to dwell on those. But just in terms of, if we start to see a shift in people towards more rural lives, more rural holidays over city holidays, over less crowded, over more crowded, for natural over man-made, those are the kind of holidays that large corporates, owners of large infrastructure, can't follow with easily. So there is the potential for there being less business pressure on local governance, on local governments and local governance, and hence less political, or the political power that's driven by a democratic process can represent people more rather than representing business. So I think this does give a chance to recreate tourism in a different way. I think, therefore, that what we're seeing at the moment is people reflecting on not only a recognition of the need to change, but an experience of a changed life imposed upon them, and the opportunity, therefore, for consumer sovereignty, for local governance to be stronger in a reformed world, which provides the opportunity for recreated tourism. So I will stop there with those thoughts. I'm very happy to follow up on those with questions afterwards, but with that, I'll hand back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you for constructing that thoughtful framework that sets the rest of the webinar up nicely. Thank you also to Graham for inviting all of the speakers this evening as well. Thanks very much. Okay, it often takes a very brave practitioner to join academics at things like this. And our next speaker is a practitioner of the highest order. Richelle Turner is the Head of Research and Insight at Moderator, a sustainable design firm, a B Corp, and a signatory and participant in the United Nations Global Compact. In her role, Richelle uses business and academic insights to understand motivations and dynamics of people and organizations, and applies research to help solve clients' business and or marketing challenges. Richelle has spent her whole career conducting consumer, economic, marketing, and policy research, largely within the tourism sector. She has held a number of senior roles at Mori, M-O-R-I, now Ipsos Mori, TUI, the large multinational tourism firm, which the UK's consumer organisation, and most recently as Vice President Research and Sustainability at the World Travel and Tourism Council. So we're very privileged to have you join us this evening, Richelle. Please welcome Richelle Turner, and I'll hand it over to you, Richelle.
Thank you, Joseph. And as you say, yes, I'm the sort of lone non-academic, so forgive me if I don't go into all the theory and discussions around that. I wanted to talk to people today about COVID consumer trends. I think I have to sort of caveat that with this graph here, which I can't really, and I don't think any of us really can start talking about a post-COVID world while it looks like this. We're certainly not in a place yet where we've got to a stage where we can say we're in a new normal, that the things of that the issues around COVID have subsided and that we're moving forward. What we're seeing, of course, is many new outbreaks, unfortunately, and many countries that are still having rising cases on a daily basis. And it's a situation that is very much ongoing. What we see, though, is that COVID has been a real accelerator of consumer trends. There are a number of global macro trends, a few of them I've pulled out here around population demographics and where the populations are growing, but also what ages are growing. And we know that in a few years' time, for example, the population of Nigeria is going to overtake the size of population in the US, for example. We've got this incredibly fragile planet, none more evident than in this COVID period. Extreme growing inequalities, geopolitical tensions, and of course the rise in data and connectivity, which has been an extreme help in many cases for the COVID world. COVID specific issues, we have this real fear of contagion, which I think is still very much going on, but it's something that people are extraordinarily concerned about. They've seen the death rate in the cities and the countries that they're living in many, many times more than what those death rates would be under normal circumstances. New spikes are reopening and people just weary of others and weary of what this disease potentially could do to them or their families. We have tremendous financial uncertainty that Graham talked about a lot, but companies almost on a daily basis are announcing job cuts. Lufthansa, for example, one of the big airlines, announcing 22,000 jobs, BP, the petroleum company, but also on a retail level as well, as people are not heading out to the shops anymore. We've seen this incredible inequity of impact. People of color, poor people, older people being far more affected by the disease on the one hand. We see women who are stuck at home and bearing the brunt of a lot of childcare in many cases. And also young people who look at their future and see how are they going to get a job. The universities that they're attending are not the experience that they or their people before them would have had with an online experience. And so these opportunities are affecting people in different ways. And of course, anxiety and due to our loss of control and freedoms, we don't know what to do. We don't know who we can trust. We turn away and people, from my own experience, people jump into the bushes if I'm out for a run because they think, I suppose, I'm contagious and they don't want to be near me. We don't know, do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? Can I talk to that person? Can I not talk to that person? And it's causing this tremendous anxiety. All of which means, we've had this lockdown, which forces changes of habits. We look at our daily patterns of behavior, and in the pre-lockdown world, about 45% of behavior is repeated day in, day out. And in lockdown, where we've been having to do the same thing more and more, that's going to be far greater than that 40%. Further, academics have looked at how long it takes to create a habit, and it takes on average about 66 days for a habit to really, really bed in and change. And so a lot of the habits will have changed as people have been forced to do things differently and do different things. And so we see this acceleration of long-term consumer trends, and a few of them here, and again, none of them are discrete. They all overlap in some way. And I'll go into each of them in a slight bit of detail in a minute, but just to highlight what they are. So the considered consumption is all about living with less, this glorification of frugality as we come to terms with we have less, so we have to live with less. We're renting and borrowing and sharing far more than we did before, but that again is something that's come up through the long term. Fairness, authenticity, and transparency. Companies now are known as glass boxes, that there is nowhere for companies to hide. And because of social media, it's either your employees on the inside, your customers, or people that just see your business on a day-to-day basis, that are looking at what your businesses are doing, looking at what your organizations are doing, and saying, actually, I don't think what you're doing is fair. Community and compassion, we've seen a lot of this. We've seen a lot of localism. We've seen a lot of kindness. We've seen a lot of people sharing and building communities in a way that they didn't before. And this is something that I think it is only going to grow. And finally, this preparation and resilience, and treating resilience almost as a value in our daily lives. And saying that we have to be prepared. We have to be prepared financially. We have to be prepared digitally. We have to be prepared with skills. Our mental wellness needs to be prepared. Our finances need to be prepared. And we need to move ahead in this world of not taking things for granted. So just to go into each of them in a slight bit of detail. Consider consumption. Here you can see some data from a 15 market survey that came out from Accenture. And you can see around the world how people say that they are really committing to, or have been committing to, more sustainable practices in the things that they've been buying and the things that they've been doing. Limiting food waste. And a lot of that is because they've had to cook more and eat out less. And they recognize how much food that they're throwing away. And the cost perhaps of that food for those that are struggling financially. So we're seeing more shopping, cost-consciously shopping, and shopping locally as well. We've also seen a lot around people actually buying less things. Now, I work for a company that is a manufacturing company, and we're moving away from just making things into helping to sell ideas. And you know, we are moving as consumers away from things and into experiences. And the experience economy is something that is growing and is something that actually brings greater happiness and joy than a product which doesn't have a long-lasting enjoyment of it. People want to travel sustainably. We see the growing interest in sustainable travel and local travel. But we also see around the world people saying that companies should stand for something other than making money, and consciously choosing companies that are doing those things. And that brings me into this fairness, honesty, and authenticity. This comes in particularly around the authenticity element. People wanting more than just words. And they want to know what brands and companies are doing and specific actions as a result of that. And here's an example from Patagonia, another B Corp, and I think the largest B Corp in the world. Patagonia wanted to make a stand around the fact that the US government was essentially taking land away from the American people. And it sued the government. And in order to make its message, it put out very, very hard-hitting advertisements like this. And it hasn't hurt Patagonia. The Patagonia brand is stronger than ever because it is taking a stand, and it is coming up behind that stand with actual action. 64% of people around the world say that they are willing to buy or boycott a brand due to its position on a social or ethical issue, according to Edelman, which is a big company that does an analysis on behaviors. And you know, these kinds of behaviors are things that people are really looking for in the products that they're buying. We're also seeing supporting local and purposeful businesses as being incredibly important. So in sense of being more local, now some of that is forced upon us because we're not able to travel, that borders are closed, and we're not able to go internationally. But people don't necessarily want to go internationally at the moment. And you're seeing that a permanent change in the dark blue of people saying that they're willing to take holidays more closer to home. But I think interesting below, again, going into this sort of compassion and empathy, is people saying that they want to pay attention now to how companies treat people. And so a couple of examples in tourism that have really come out to me. Kind Traveler is an American company, and it gives $10 per night for every night you stay or you book with this company. It's a socially conscious give and get hotel booking and media platform. And so it gives the travelers the opportunity to choose the charities in the local communities where they are staying. So if you're staying in a hotel in, say, Venice, California, then the charities that you would be offering your $10 a night to would be in Venice, California. And so to really offer that support in the destinations. And another example here around supporting local, this app and website spotted by locals, this real sense of actually not wanting to do what tourists are doing, wanting to do what the local people are doing. And of course, there's this huge movement by those that are saying, no, don't put us on the app because we don't want tourists to know about our places. But of course, that's a whole other issue involved. And we're seeing, a lot of kindness here over the COVID period. And Graham mentioned some of this, but, clapping for carers and sharing seeds and growing vegetables and shopping for our neighbors and building those communities is something really that is expected to continue. People also saying that they want to share and buy more products locally. Around the world, nearly 7 in 10 people are saying that they want to buy more local products as COVID ends. Now, building resilience, and this, as mentioned earlier, comes in a number of forms. It comes in, say, financial and digital and wellness. And you can see some examples here. So from a digital perspective, and it's an indicator, it's not necessarily one that we would want to herald as the way forward, but Amazon here increasing sales 40% year on year. And we don't want to give our money to Jeff Bezos, but we want to capitalize on this trend of having a digital presence, and companies now must have a digital presence if they want to survive for the future. Also, the sense of working from home. 46% of people who never worked from home now plan to work from home in the future. Now, of course, again, going back to the sense of inequality, you can only work from home if you have the kind of job which allows you to, which in many cases is a white-collar job. And so again, it creates, again, this disparity between the white-collar and the blue-collar jobs and who is able to work from home and what that difference will be. We're also seeing this increase in the savings rate, and it's 19% in June, but it had reached 32% in April this year. And in the US, which had always been trucking along at about 6 or 7% savings, for people who have the money, who have been able to save during the COVID period, not to be outspending and to be saving that money suggests that, again, going back to a world where we went and just bought what we wanted or shopped whenever we want or bought 3 handbags or bought 2 t-shirts is unlikely to continue in the way that it did before. That keeping up the savings and building this resilience for the future is something to do. From a wellness situation, we, there's this great quote that we can't be individually well in a world that is unwell. And that comes both from mental wellness, but also from our environment and the biodiversity and climate change that's affecting our world. So according to the World Health Organization, around 350 million people are suffering from depression. And they think that actually in the next few years, depression is going to overtake heart disease as one of the world's most, or as the world's biggest disease that people carry with them throughout their lives. But we also see the sense of recognition that our world can't continue the way it was before, and that actually the impact of COVID may either have come from our lack of care for the climate or might be exacerbated by the lack of care for the climate. And so in the long term, on a global survey, 71% of people saying that climate change is as serious an issue as COVID. So I thought I'd leave with this final slide, which, a picture that was taken in Hong Kong, which reads that we can't return to normal because the normal that we had was precisely the problem. And I think that's right. I think going back to wherever we end up and say we're certainly not there yet, but it has to be it has to be a different world, and people are waking up to that different world, and companies and tourism needs to be aware of where people are going and what they're thinking, so that they can be ready to capture the experiences that they want when the time is right to do so. So thank you very much, and look forward to the next presentation.
Thank you, Richelle. Thank you for that really, really fascinating and insightful account of consumer trends. And that last statement you made, we cannot be individually well in a world that is unwell, highlights the interconnectivity between humans and non-humans and nature as well. So thank you very much for that. But don't go away. Our next speaker is Professor Javier Fonte, one of the leading tourism researchers around the globe. Javier is Professor of Sustainability Marketing at the University of Surrey, and also Professor at the University of the Arctic in Norway. He researches and develops methods of sustainable tourism production and consumption, and is co-editor of the leading journal, the Journal of Sustainable Tourism. Javier has published widely about sustainable tourism certification and has consulted on sustainable product development, marketing and communication for several UN agencies, the International Finance Corporation, the European Commission, Visit England, Fonte Ireland, Visit Wales, Visit Scotland, and WWF, amongst others. He has conducted over 160 courses for more than 3,000 businesses on how to market and communicate sustainability. Importantly, during 2020, Javier has been principal investigator for a European Commission report on sustainable tourism measurement systems. This is currently the University of Surrey's, he is currently the University of Surrey's principal investigator of an Interreg €23.5 million project on how to reduce winter seasonality in the UK and France by supporting the development of experiential, sustainable tourism that improves the economy, contributes to healthy communities, and preserves the environment. Without further ado, I hand over to you, Javier.
Thank you, Joseph. You've just reminded me the next time I need to send a shorter bio, because that is way too much in there. Can you all see my screen? Okay.
Yes, we can.
I'll assume you can see my screen. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So I was asked to provide some data to as a background around consumer confidence when it comes to flying, looking ahead for the next few months. And some of this data complements the material that Richelle was just showing, but in my case, very much in one very specific sector. Typically, tourist destinations have used past data to be able to take decisions. We do surveys every year to find out how tourists from the previous year were satisfied and how much they traveled. And I think that we have now learned that traditional tourism statistics are no longer fit for purpose to take decisions in very volatile situations like the ones that we've got now. So we've got a number of questions that we need to be asking ourselves, and I think that big data is able to help us answer some of those questions, such as what is the impact of COVID-19 on my tourist destination, how will my destination develop, what will be the evolution, and how will I do compared to my competitors? When will different tourist markets reactivate, or what will the different markets do and which ones will reactivate first? And what we found is that we can capture data on 3 sets of information. We can capture data on what is the desire to travel, how much do people want to travel, and to do this we can look for data on how people are searching online for flights. We can look at data on what is their intention to travel. So when we go online and we look at possible flights and we search them on Google, which are those flights then, when we have a whole list, which are the ones that we click on to actually be able to analyze more in detail and see what are the options for us for that particular flight. And then of course we could have data on the actual purchase decision to travel. Now, the data on purchase decision to travel is unlikely that we'll be able to find it, or at least not in immediate time and not necessarily looking ahead of us. But we've got tools like, for example, Skyscanner is able to provide us data on desire and intention to travel. And this is what I've been doing over the last few months. So Skyscanner gave us data, essentially we paid for this data, on 500 million flight searches across the world. 500 million flight searches is a lot of data. So luckily I work with a statistician who loves big data and was able to pull some of this data for us in here. This is the searches and the purchases we have had for flights up to 30th of June 2020. We are updating this data on a regular basis. So this is how people have been searching for flights, and this is linked to their actual intentions to purchase those flights, okay? So as I say, we don't have specific data on how much they have actually purchased, but what this tells us is, in this case, in this graph, for the Middle East, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia, how before COVID, the actual intentions to fly were between 20, about 10 to 20% above what had been in the previous year, okay? And what we clearly see here is very quickly from February onwards that the intention to fly drops quite massively, first in North Asia, then in other parts of Asia and the Middle East, and then the drop is continuous. And from June onwards, what the data essentially showing us is year on year, how much are people searching to fly compared to the previous year, okay? So what we can see is there's a drop of more than 70% or about 70% for pretty much every market. This is not an actual flight. We know, of course, that the number of people that have been dropped, that have reduced the number of flights is more than that. This is, are people actually going online and looking for flights with a desire to be able to fly soon and actually clicking on some of those flights to get more specific details? You can see there is a slight increase in desire to fly by the end of the year, by November, December, okay, particularly around Middle East, more than in Northeast Asia. When we then look at some of this data and we compare over periods of time, we can see that the data we collected in April is different to the data we have then collected just 2 months later in June. You can see that the searches and the picks, searches are always higher. This is just somebody going online and seeing, are there any flights to go from Japan to Europe? I wonder how much they cost. Picks are the actual clicks on one specific flight to then get more specific details on that flight. And you can see that at the beginning of the year, number of people searching for flights was much, much higher than a year earlier, whereas the number of picks wasn't so much, okay? That's because people's interest in flying is always higher than the actual choices of flights. But then what you can really see here, the difference is from March onwards is when the data really varies. And we can see that as the months pass, our consumer confidence for the ability of our sector to recover and our perception of risk around flying essentially is getting worse and worse, okay? So we can see that, the data is changing on a month-by-month basis, and our destinations in general are developing for the worse. We can also see what is our situation compared to competitors, and you can see in which parts of the world there is a perception that things will get better in the next few months. So for example, in Europe, you can see Northern Europe, and that there's a perception by those markets, the situations will get better faster, whereas the perceptions in Asia aren't as good as they are in other parts of the world. So if you were to looking at, well, which are the markets that are most likely to help me recover, or which will be the countries where we should be spending money, trying to target those particular target groups, because those customers are more predisposed to believe that the situation will improve, you can use some of this data to then be able to identify specific markets. And you can see that in some of the markets, the situation is not so. So you can see, for example, in here that the market for Northeast Asia for regional travel as well as domestic travel is going to be depressed for longer than the markets from other parts of the world. So when we collected this data, we then looked at, well, how do we help specific governments to be able to use data from Skyscanner to create some dashboards that will help them then make other decisions. Now, I don't have this particular data for Japan. I can show you here the data we collected for Spain. And what we found here was we basically looked at which will be the markets that are going to reactivate fastest for inbound tourism into Spain. And so any market where the desire or the intention to fly was worse than 30% compared to the previous year, we used the traffic light system and we marked them in red. The markets that had dropped between 0 and 30%, we marked them in amber. And the markets who actually had been an improvement from the previous year, we marked them in green. And so we could see in here This was data we collected in April 2020, and we could see that for the summer season, every market across the world was going to have a drop of at least 30% compared to the previous year. But we could see that for some markets, there was a desire to come back for the October to December sector. And so, for example, when we were advising the Spanish tourist board and some of the regional tourist boards, we were saying to them, look, spend your money on trying to target the UK and the Irish, and to a certain extent the German market, and don't spend your money trying to target some of the markets, because some of those markets are more predisposed to believe that they will be able to fly when it comes to that time of year. We keep doing this data analysis month by month, and with some of the tourist boards, we're providing advice on a month-by-month basis to see how consumer confidence from those countries is changing, to then be able to have much more targeted marketing campaigns. Effectively, we've got this data not only on a market-by-market basis, but we can have it on an airport-by-airport basis. And what we can see there is from which airports anywhere in the world is demand to fly increasing or decreasing on real-time data, okay? And linked to this, we can then tailor this to specific online marketing campaigns to focus on particular markets that will want to fly specific routes, to then be able to have our best opportunities from a yield management point of view to maximize the return investment on any marketing budget spent by those tourist boards. And linked to this, we can see which markets will reactivate first, not only when they'll reactivate, but which are the specific markets that we can get most activity from. We can see, therefore, some advantages in using big data to take destination decisions like this. We can see advantages that we can use real-time data. Past data that has been collected through customer questionnaires isn't going to tell us very much. We can see a huge amount of granularity, both from a temporal as well as a territorial point of view. As I say, if you can find out from which airports and to which airports, this is huge. What we, for example, seen is that tourists are more likely to be willing to buy flights with specific airlines and not others. They're avoiding low-cost airlines, and particularly in Europe, airlines like Ryanair. They're avoiding large airports, and consumers are favoring smaller airports. They're favoring point-to-point flying as opposed to flying that requires connections. And the markets that are most likely to recover are destinations with flights less than 2 hours from your home country. Okay, clearly we've seen a recovery of domestic travel and travel by car, and travel that does not require pre-booking compared to travel that requires any form of booking. So I'm using here data around flights in particular. And the advantage, the final advantage here, is that we can forecast based on real data. So we can have very flexible decisions that we can take as a tourist board based on this data. All of these advantages, if you think about it, turn into challenges as well. We need data scientists that are very good at understanding data. And what we've seen is tourist boards are not particularly equipped to use big data. And they're still trying to use big data in the same way that they used traditional paper-based questionnaires. This is a little bit like using your iPhone, just like you used a normal landline-based phone 30, 40 years ago. It seems like a missed opportunity to not be able to use all the additional features that big data allows you to use. So even when we have good data scientists employed in tourist boards to then be able to maximize the benefits of big data, we can then use data from a user-oriented thinking, and we can use it to complement and in some cases replace official statistical agencies that are now kind of behind the times in some of that data. If you find this information of interest and you want to know more about the market demand for flights, we already have a journal article that has been published on this topic, and you can get more details there on what's happening in different parts of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Javier, for that. Very important perspective on data and what data can tell us and how important it is in decision making. But we'll be able to get back to you with some questions later on, Javier. Thanks very much for that. Please thank Professor Javier Fonte. Our next speaker is much closer to home at Wakayama, Professor Kumi Kato, Professor Kumi Kato is professor at the Faculty of Tourism and the Graduate School of Tourism in Wakayama University. She is also a specially appointed professor at Musashino University and has a visiting professorship at the Asian Institute of Tourism, the University of the Philippines. Kumi has also acted in advisory roles for organizations including the Sustainable Tourism Promotion Center, APTEC in Japan, Osaka University, and Global Himalayan Expeditions in India. Kumi currently teaches sustainability in tourism with a particular focus on community, identity, empowerment, and resilience, and has also taught in Australia for over 24 years. Kumi is currently leading a national project, the Japan Sustainable Tourism Standard for Destinations, a GSTC-based standard developed during 2019 and was implemented nationally during 2020. Kumi served as a site auditor for the World Travel and Tourism Council's Tourism for Tomorrow Award, and Kumi is a passionate advocate for sustainability in community development, education, and research, working with a wide range of stakeholders and initiating practical and often creative projects. That said, I'll hand over to you, Professor Kato.
Thank you very much, Joseph. So sorry about the, really that bio was too long, sorry. Sorry, so this is screen share, is that all right? Is that shared properly? Is that okay? Okay, thank you so much for this invitation, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. And then I'm really sorry I can't invite you all to Japan, but so nice to have you all there. So today, as for Joseph's introduction today, my role is to really talk a little bit about the Japan's national initiatives in developing a sustainable tourism standard. It was just launched just a month ago or so at the end of June. So it's a GSTC-based national guideline. So today I'm really talking on behalf of the entire team, including some of our students, and also the coordinating section, the Office for Inbound Facilitation at Japan Tourism Agency, JTA, or Kankocho at the Central Government Tourism Agency. So today, so the common expectation might be that we're going to come up with some quick solutions for this kind of situation globally we are experiencing, but such as there are projects such as there are like a go-to campaigns that the government initiated. But I do really believe that this is an opportunity for long-term shift of long-term thinking shift. And then, so I just like to introduce that the Japan's initiative in the last few years, which I think it's a very important beginning. So I just like to talk about a little bit. So oh, sorry, slideshow, sorry. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. So the slideshow. Oh, so as you know, as many of you, the Japan has experienced a massive, very massive kind of growth in particularly inbound tourism in the last decade, but particularly in the last few years. And then there was a very big expectation because that we have a series of like mega sporting events, such as the Rugby World Cup last year, and also Tokyo 2020, which is now Tokyo 2021. So inbound tourism exceeded outbound in the last few years, and then so there was a big expectation to further growth, and that was the before Corona, sorry, BC era. But as many other major cities in the world, so Japan started to feel, some of the major cities started to feel the stress. So the government initiated this sustainable tourism promotion office. It was established 2019. Oh, sorry, so 3 minutes. Sorry about that. So so in that, so we had a national survey, and then it was decided that we actually going to implement GSTC destination criteria. as a national guideline. So it's many of you are very aware that this actually consists of 4 areas and 38 standards. So it was a very, unfortunately, very, very quick kind of project, because we had to do this in nearly 6 months, really. So, but JTA became a GSTC member, took up the membership. So it was, some of the activities has been publicized on their website, which was really a great opportunity for Japan to actually promote their initiatives internationally. So I don't have time to go into the detail of the standard, which are all available online. But as part of that development project, we actually used the GSTC to actually conduct a national survey. So we actually turned all the GSTC destination criteria as a questionnaire and then send it to 1740 municipalities in Japan. So it was only a 1 month project, but we actually received about 630 response in the end. So I'm sorry we don't have time to go into all these details, but so we actually now analyzing this data by criteria, but also by destination type and by regions as well. We can't really, sorry, I really don't have time to go into that detail, but then I think this really provided a very great common platform or the language to actually talk about sustainability specifically to tourism, because a lot of the local government answered that yes, they do have a lot of the, like they have plans, they have policies, they have risk management plans, they have policies on like environmental conservation, but not really specifically to tourism. So this was, I think it's a really great exercise that we can now talk specifically, more specifically about tourism. So I think Japan, this COVID situation, I think for opportunities in Japan, I think Graham talked about like rural development focus, but I think that was probably would create a different kind of opportunities for local areas or regional areas in Japan, which is really the very reason that the Japan's tourism was brought into the national sort of policy and strategy. So, but that's also specifically to Japan, probably not specifically to Japan, but that's very much related to the work style change. I think now we have the words in Japanese that we have, like words like remote, workation, co-working space, and so all these languages coming into our sort of daily lifestyle. So I think that would be a significant changes in that work situation, which would have implication for tourism. And also I think this is a great opportunity for Japan for internationalization that coming using setting the sustainability standard nationally. So I hope this would be an opportunity for Japan's tourism to become more people-focused, as Graham said, and less political. And also I really like what Richelle said, more kind of tourism. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kumi. Thank you for your insights on that. Okay, everyone, in the interest of time, we will get straight through to questions. Thank you to all of those who've submitted questions either through the chat or through one of us here. The 4 panelists won't be able to stick around for any longer than, say, the next 15 minutes or so. So we'll get straight into it in terms of questions. The first question, and I will paraphrase this question, comes from Kana Murakoshi from JNTO, the Japanese National Tourist Office. And his question is about the relevance of the SDGs in the so-called new normal. And I wonder if any of our panelists can talk about that. How relevant are the SDGs insofar as tourism in the new normal is concerned? Anyone?
I'll have a go to start with then, Joseph. I mean, I think they have to be. People will understand. The SDGs are about how we live our life, aren't they? So they're very relevant to the future. I think the issues remain the same. What I think will change, or what I hope will change, is the answers we come to in assessing the different elements of the SDGs. Now, the SDGs are incompatible. There's a lot of incompatibility in there. We want to have a wealthier economy, but we want to produce less waste and less pollution, etc., etc. So it is implicit and increasingly explicit in the SDGs how we balance all those things. So I think the SDGs will remain very important for the future. What I think will probably change is our assessment of where that balance comes in evaluating the trade-offs.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Anyone else? Richelle, I think, would you like to add to what Graham has said?
Yeah, I mean, I think the business world has really embraced the SDGs. And you mentioned earlier when you were introducing me, as a B Corp, the B Corp community has linked up with the UN and created a B Corp Sustainability Action Manager. And so we go through systematically the Sustainable Development Goals and our businesses and our business plans to identify how and where we need to be taking action, and where we are weak and where we might have opportunities for further growth. I think, you know, yes, there is that question around more waste, but I also think that there is a huge movement towards more circularity. We're seeing that in a lot of products and a lot of innovation that's happening there. So I think, you know, time is going to be part of this, as will a lot of investment and money that's required. But I think there is movement certainly in aligning SDGs with business goals.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. Kumi, please go ahead. You'll need to unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. One of the reasons that we actually selected to use GSTC as a national guideline was because it's actually connected to SDGs. So each, like 38 standards actually identified which actually, you know, which SDGs that it actually addressed to. So a lot of the local governments now have like SDG section or SDG strategy sections. So that works across that the department, across the different department, which actually is the great advantage, because all this like a sustainable tourism standard implementation, we can't obviously, only the tourism sector section can't do it themselves. So, but then with the SDGs, I think it can be implemented across the board. So I think that has advantage for the tourism sector as well. So I think it's very important. Sorry, that's it. That's my answer.
Thank you very much, Kumi. The next question comes from Europe. I think from Januszka Schmidt, I think is in Europe. What kind of change can we observe in the way tourism destinations are marketed? She asked, is there a shift towards more security, or does marketing react in a different way to COVID-19? And it's related to another question talking about the shift from sun, sand, and sea to sun, sand, sea, sanitation, and safety. How does all of this affect destination marketing? Javier, would you want to jump in?
You're the professor of marketing. You're up.
It's not an easy question, because to be honest, I think what we've seen is that many of these destinations are responded with more of the same. I think large institutions are not particularly good at adapting. And my feeling is large companies have been flexible and they've adapted because they've needed to, but because also they've got the knowledge and systems to respond to change. But I don't think that's the strength of the public sector, or maybe this is my very European-centric vision. You know, we have been very slow at acknowledging we've got problems and finding solutions. We kind of hoped that the problems would go away. So as a result, we're in a situation with very low consumer confidence. And what I've seen from tourist destinations has been, let's just promote the people should come back and complain when another government says that an airport bridge between my country and your country is going to be closed down. So I'm afraid I don't have an awful lot of kind of confidence in what the governments are doing to promote tourism.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Richelle, maybe, hopefully you've got a more optimistic view.
I mean, I don't know the wider picture, but I've seen a number of really interesting examples of how certain destination organizations, particularly in the US, have adapted during COVID. And traditionally, they almost ignored their local markets. And everyone of any value to these organizations, these marketing organizations, came from the outside world. And in the COVID world, they switched in some cases. And I'm thinking of quite a few in Florida, but also peppered throughout the US. And they recognized that if they wanted the businesses to survive, it was going to be the local people that would have to support those local businesses. And so they started providing information for the local people. Here are the shops that are open today. These are the hours that are open. Here is where you can get your takeaways. You can't eat in, but this is where you can get your takeaways. Here is where you can get this information. Here is a park that you can go to if you just want to get some fresh air and go outside. And so they started recognizing the value of local people. And I think if marketing organizations can start doing that, then that is only a positive step forward.
Okay, thank you, Richelle. Our next question comes from a colleague in India, Professor Venkat Rao at Pondicherry University in India. And I guess this might be directed at you, Javier, since your presentation talked about passenger demand. What Professor Rao is asking is, to what extent will the aviation sector be able to respond quickly given the crisis?
Again, complex, because we have seen some good actions being taken, for example, at airports, but then, you know, we tend to have like the last mile, you know, challenges there. So we've had, for example, fantastic airports taking very good measures up to the moment when you get to the airport. But then, you know, the bus transfer, packing you in, you know, 50 people at a time inside the same bus. And once you get on the airplane, then you're allowed to take your mask off. And the challenge has been that some airlines, and in Europe in particular, Ryanair, have been blamed for not following guidelines. So we've got challenges where individual companies not responding to you know, the necessary guidelines or within the limit of what they can do has then kind of damaged the you know, how the whole sector has been perceived.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think this is one, Joseph, if I can just come in, this is one of the interesting elements of COVID where there is an opportunity to remake tourism. And if you go back to 2008, after the financial crash, which was the last moment when we had big economic stimulus coming from government into industry to bail out industry. If you look in the US into the car manufacturing industry in particular, there was a lot of conditionality applied to the money that went into that sector. And that's what gave a lot of emphasis to the push for electric vehicles that we're seeing now. One of the things I think that's really disappointing about now is a lot of governments just putting money into sectors to bail them out, to not recreate them. There's no conditionality being applied to it. It's just simply, let's keep it going in its current form for the future. And it'd be wonderful to see the government saying to airlines, yes, we'll keep you going. We can't conceive of an economy in the future that doesn't have aviation, but you have to be investing in different models of business. You have to be investing in new technology, in new fuels. You have to be investing, you have to be accepting limits to emissions per year. You have to be offsetting, and that conditionality should be coming now. And we're not seeing that, which is a real missed opportunity, I think, from governments to try to recreate tourism for the future. We've got a big lever now over industry, and we're not pulling it.
Okay.
Yeah, and this applies even more to the cruise industry than to the airline industry.
Absolutely.
I think it did happen in France. I think the French government told Air France that it would help with their financing if they did stop their domestic airline travel. So I think they're, in certain countries, I think they have been taking steps, but you're absolutely right with the cruise lines.
Okay, just a couple more questions, but in the interest of time, everyone's trying to look into their crystal balls, right, to try and describe what the post-pandemic environment will look like. And I guess, Richelle, you talked about the changes in consumer trends. And one of the questions that came through is, what aspects of tourism that we've become used to in the pre-pandemic environment will no longer be around in the post-pandemic environment? For example, mass tourism.
Well, I don't think mass tourism is always wrong. I think it can be managed, and it can be managed sustainably in a way that perhaps when people go off track and in areas where they shouldn't be trekking can actually make more damage. Someone the other day told me that they had written a book. Actually, it was the quote in my presentation. I was speaking to the author of that book yesterday, and in his preparations for the book, he had rung around many firms and many very, very, very large firms who were talking about business travel and their future projections. And many thought that at least 50% cut in business travel. So if there's a 50% cut in business travel, the business travelers tend to subsidize the economy flights for most legacy airlines, which means then that the prices of those flights will increase. Which means then that those sort of, let's just hop over to X destination for the weekend, or let's just go to on a stag do or a hen do or a girls' weekend, or one of these quick, cheap and dirty weekends isn't likely to, well, will cost far more than it perhaps previously did. And so those kinds of trips, people might start to think again about. Say business travel is expecting a cut. We're expecting a cut clearly in events and conferences as well. So all of those trips and then the subsequent leisure visits that you might do on the back of those, we're going to see far fewer, less of them for the time being, I would think as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. One question that came through about tourism careers. There's lots of academics here, lots of practitioners. We have students and people whose careers are built on tourism. What does this all mean for tourism careers?
Well, tourism is still a fantastically interesting thing to study. So if any tourism academics are concerned about their jobs, I think it remains a fantastically interesting thing to study and to through research or to study at university. There is something about travel which is very human, isn't it? And I can't see of a future where we're not going to want to travel, where our spirit of adventure and curiosity and humanity and wanting to spend time with people and interacting, those things feel very human, and therefore I suspect will remain. I think what form that takes absolutely is open for discussion. So will we see more regional based tourism? I think we will. Will we see more family based tourism? I think we will. More travel to rural areas as opposed to cities. The kind of things that, again, that Richelle and Javier and Kumi have talked about. Less crowded, more natural, less man-made, those kind of things. So I think we will see the form of tourism change. We may see it come down in scale, so it may not be back to those days where 3, 4, 5 holidays a year increasingly become the norm, and the hypermobility that we've seen in the past, the business travel. I, for one, would be very pleased if business travel receded a little bit. That would make my life a lot better. But I think that the substance of tourism and that spirit of curiosity that we all love from when we travel, I just can't see that that changing and going away, really, and being replaced with technology, or being replaced with purchasing things or spending time in our gardens or any of those other things. But others may disagree.
Okay, any final quick remarks from anyone before we get to the final stage of tonight's webinar? Javier, Kumi, Richelle?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I wonder how many of the academics preparing the lectures to start this coming semester are fundamentally changing what they're going to teach,
Yeah.
or if we will still want to teach how things used to be in the past.
Yeah.
And it's our choice as academics if we have a future. If we're going to teach how things used to be in the past, and we keep talking about we want to go back to the past, you're going to be the dinosaur that gets stuck in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Our curriculum, a lot of our curriculum has field-based studies and experience, field works, and then I think that's something that we really need to consider how we're going to do it. So that's going to be a big change in how we teach as well.
Okay, thank you, Kumi. Okay, before we officially close tonight's proceedings, I'd like to express a very big thank you to Professor Graham Miller, Professor Javier Fonte, Richelle Turner, Professor Kumi Kato. Thank you very much for giving us your time and your perspectives this evening. I also want to thank the many participants across the Asia Pacific region and in Japan in particular, and even further abroad. We hope we've given you something valuable to take away. Thanks to the Center for Tourism Research team that's working behind the scenes, Misato Murano, Ms. Maki Kobayashi, Dr. Hayato Nagai, and Associate Professor Eiji Ito. And a reminder that next month's webinar will feature Professor Richard Sharpley, so please be sure to look out for announcements. Thank you, everybody, and please stand by for the pop-up poll. Until the next time, we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.